Hey guys, nice to see you again. Let's turn our attentions now from Confucianism over to that classical, mysterious work of the Tao Te Ching and Taoism. Now, I got to tell you, looking at Taoism is a little bit trickier than looking at Confucianism, at least as far as our purposes go. I think that there's a number of reasons for this. Some of the reasons, many of the reasons, can be addressed actually in the introduction to the Written edition of the Tao Te Ching that we're looking at. They have to do with the fact that so much of the language that we read about is metaphor, that the Tao Te Ching itself is not really one work, it's a compendium of a lot of different works that have been put together over different times in different editions, and trying to fit them together and figure out what fits where and what's speaking to what is tricky. But like I said, Ryden's work on this really does help, and the way in which he lays it out, that's why I picked this particular edition. And you can begin to get a sense of how the work emerges and where it's going just by looking through the introduction. I think it's helpful. So that should help some, but only some. And really, the deeper issues that we need to deal with, the conceptual issues, they're something we're going to have to wrestle with on our own. Now, a lot of people will talk about Taoism, and certainly about the Tao Te Ching, as a work of mysticism. I am personally of the position that this really is not a very accurate way of thinking about what the Tao Te Ching is. I don't think that the Tao Te Ching is filled with mysticism so much as it's filled with a peculiar kind of paradox. But in order to get at that paradox and unpack that a bit, we need to understand the concepts. And so one of the ways in which I've tried to do this over the years is to introduce the Tao Te Ching to people, is to begin by trying to show you some of the basic terms that get used in Taoism, and then explain what their philosophical significance is and how they fit into one another. So that's what I'm going to do right here. Most of the time, I'm going to try to stick to just using the English terms. I'm not going to switch over the Chinese, but there are a couple terms that there really isn't an easy English equivalent to it, and because of that, I've got to use the Chinese for it. Okay, so anyway, that's where we're going. So, on to the concepts. The first concept is actually one of these terms that really I do need to use the Chinese for it, and that concept is the concept of qi. Now, you've probably heard this term before, if nowhere else, when people are talking about interior design and feng shui and the qi of the right side of the room and things like that, and you might not have known exactly what was being discussed. Well, it's probably appropriate that you didn't know what was being discussed, because I'll tell you, the term qi doesn't really have an English equivalent. It on one hand refers to the force or effect or impact that a thing has on and in the world, and at the same time it refers to the thing itself. How is this? Well, let me explain. You see, in most Indo-European languages, the Western languages that we, such as English, that we speak, there is a tendency to make a distinction between the matter, the substance of something, by just talking about what it is, and the actions of something, the force of it, what it does. And these are two separate things, right? And even the structure of our language is oriented towards that. Well, the problem is that in classical Chinese thought, at least on a conceptual level, there is no such distinction, or at least when such distinctions are made, they're made in abstract. You kind of see this a little bit in the introduction with the bit about literary Chinese, where the language itself is ambiguous and you're meant to interpret it. That alludes to it, but it runs even deeper than that. There's a basic way in which the substance of something is also the force of it, and the force of it is also the substance of it. To refer to the interdependence of matter and force at once of a thing, right? That is qi. And that's why it's really hard to translate it. Sometimes you see it translated as material force, or matter force, with a little hyphen between the two. But that's really what it is. And it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways if you think about it for a moment. I mean, how much can you know about the substance of what something is without looking what it does? We know the substance of something by its doing. And we don't know that there is a doing without knowing that there is a thing to do, right? the force implies the substance, and the substance implies the force. The two are interdependent. It is getting to this interdependence. It is getting to this matter force of the thing, such as it is. That is the qi. And that's why when you talk about the qi of anything, you are talking about its innermost nature, its essence, its quintessence, if you like, the basic way in which it is what it is, it does what it does, moves as it moves. You can also see, too, I think, how well this idea of qi fits into this dynamic cosmology that we've already been seeing with the Confucianism. Remember, classical Chinese thought tends to look at the world much more as a series of events that are emerging rather than things, than truth that simply stay. Because of that, if you want to describe what something is, you don't refer to its isness, as it were. Sorry to butcher the language like that, but this is what we need to do in order to get to the concepts. You don't refer to the way in which something just sort of stays there. Rather, what you do, the way in which you approach the concept, is by looking at how it moves, it shifts, it stands in relation. Certainly, this is what we saw with Confucianism, right? This was the whole idea behind ritual. This is the idea behind Ren, behind this humaneness, this authoritative action in which we resonate and bring out these concepts. All of this is getting at that basic idea of qi, of getting at the essence, the flavor, the nature of something. But you can only get at this, you can only understand this, if you understand fundamentally that the world not only is changing, but the world is change itself. The world is the shiftingness itself, if you like, right? So this is one of the things that we have to keep in mind with this. What else did I want to tell you about qi? Well, I guess maybe I should bring up the reason why I'm bringing up qi. The reason I'm bringing up qi is because in the idea of qi, we have the seeds, really the weavings, if you like, of what brings us to the next concept that I want to bring up with this, Dao. Now again, Dao, classical Chinese term. This is a term that on one hand gets translated as the way, but that again is a bit of a misnomer, because at least it's misleading in the sense that we tend to think of it in terms of the truth of something or the principle of something. This isn't correct. Actually, even on a literary level, it's not correct. There's other words for that in Chinese that are probably more apt for things like principle and truth, and it certainly doesn't get into the cosmology. Instead, what you have with the idea of Tao, when Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, the classical Taoist thinkers, and Wang Bi, when they talk about Tao, what they're talking about is the totality of all qi in the instant that it is, in the instant way of itself. Given that that's the case, there's a couple things you got to keep in mind about it. First off, it's going to mean that Tao is the dynamic totality of all qi at once, right? It is this explosion of every single thing doing and being in its interdependence with everything else at once. This is Tao. That's the first thing to keep in mind. The cosmos as an event in the instant of being that event. The second thing to keep in mind about it is that it is instantaneous. Every instant of Tao is the Tao itself. And you can see that basically means that it's changing from one instant to the next instant to the next instant to the next instant to the next instant. Tao is this perpetual event upon event upon event upon event. Now, if you have this, that Tao is the dynamic totality of all qi. If you have this idea that Tao is instantaneous, it is that immediate event of all qi acting dynamically in relation to everything else, it brings us to another point, a really important point that comes up again and again. Tao itself is inexpressible. It's something that can't ever be articulated because, as the great Heraclitus said over in Greece, you can't step in the same river twice. Indeed, maybe you can't step in the same river once. What you have is a situation, and that even underestimates it in some respects, what you have is a situation in which Tao does not allow itself to be articulated, because the moment one articulates it, it's already past. All right, more in a second.